All right, welcome back to another episode, another season
Brand new season.
of Raise 'em Up.
Yep.
Season number seven. That's a good number. I like the number seven for a lot of reasons. It's a good one. And season number 7, that's just wild. I mean, can we reflect on that for just a second? I mean, thinking about where I always love watching as things become or start as an idea and you just start talking about them. And then you find yourself like years later going, oh, wow.
Yep.
Right. You know, even though I do feel a little bit like we're like The Voice, like 3 seasons a year or something like that. But, you know, even so, right, 7, that's pretty crazy. I haven't done an episode count though. That would be pretty interesting to see.
Ooh, good question. Yeah,
just how many we've got. But we've got an exciting season in front of us. A new book, a new conversation to have. Write it on their hearts. Practical help for discipling your kids. We'll need to break that word down for sure. By Chris Swain and Melissa Swain. And today we have with us
Melanie Schultz, Director of Adult Discipleship here at Trinity and a mom of 3 kiddos, 8, 6, and 2.
And Uma, Director of Student Ministries here, and a father for 3 boys who 2 are launched, off in college and 1 in high school.
There you go. Pastor Lee Hope. No kids, so I don't count. Yeah. So
Stop it.
Spartacus.
I guess Spartacus, yeah. No, and it's funny because like Chris, as he opens up in the introduction, it's kind of like he was in my shoes, like as a youth guy, a youth pastor, youth director type thing. And he would tell parents all the time, give them great advice or whatever, and be like, you're the chief discipler. Again, we're gonna have to break that down if I keep using it. But it was one of those like parents would always look at him and be like, oh, you don't know, you don't have kids. And then I appreciated how like once he did have kids, he just was more appreciative of how challenging parenting is, which at least I think I've gotten to that point. Like, I don't think parenting is easy. I think the world that kids are being raised in right now, I think the world that I'm living in is difficult. So I can't imagine. I tell students this all the time. Like, I don't envy them. I'm not one that wishes I was born today or something like that, because
100%.
like even just trying to navigate what is true, like with the gifts of AI and things like that, where you can like do deep fakes and stuff like that. You can tell the kind of shows that I watch, especially crime shows, right? They get into this kind of thing. Like, is it real? Is it not real?
Yeah.
And then like specifically the conflicts we've even seen just play out over the last 6 months in the world and trying to navigate what is actually happening, what is true. Like, I didn't have to worry about that, or at least I didn't think I had to worry about that when I was a teenager. So it's just kind of wild.
Yeah.
And I think about this book, and Melanie, I'm glad you encouraged us to make sure we read the foreword to it. Because what a story.
Yeah,
what a story behind the development of this book.
If you're going to read along with us, man, we're going to spoil it for you right now. But
yeah.
It's just an absolutely powerful account of this guy who says, hey, you know, I really admire my friend Chris as a dad and how intentional he is in discipling his kids. And I just really like somebody needs to be writing about how to do this. Like,
and everybody at work
help.
thinks this too, right? Yeah. Everybody's like, oh, if only we're half the parent that Chris is.
Yeah. And so he encourages him. He says, you know, hey, I've been thinking like somebody needs to write something. And Chris, the author, says, I actually have a manuscript in place, and I'm working on it right now. And hey, let's set a deadline so that you can, you can look over this, because the other gentleman, the other pastor was headed out on a sabbatical, and he said, I really want to have this in your hands so that you can give me some feedback. And I think the deadline was something like July 9th, or know. And he said that turned out to be a really incredibly important day because he stuck to it. He got his, manuscript all ready to go. He passed it along, and then that day, Chris died in a car accident.
Well, he went into the ER.
Yeah, he went into the ER. He was unresponsive.
And then July 15th, he died.
He actually passed away.
A week later,
And so the manuscript, and then with the help and input of Chris's wife, Melissa, is what we'll be reading this season.
Yeah.
But it's just this kind of incredible thing of, wow, just the intentionality that he had as a dad and it being recognized, and then this plan to share the wisdom and knowledge and the focus on Jesus. Man.
The timing. I mean, the timing is incredible. Yeah. I mean, thinking about how like Chris was in a role that's similar to Uma and I live in with pastoring or shepherding young people like high school age. And we see that in the introduction, right?
Yeah.
I was kind of joking, like Chris was kind of like me,
Mhm.
and thinking parenting was not that it was
Just raise
easy.
your kids well. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Just disciple them out to follow Jesus.
And then him growing in it, but then to see like he had the experience of just the research, the knowledge of
how important
raising your
it
kids
is.
in the faith, raising them up. And then he had the experience of actually not taking that knowledge and having to try and apply it as a parent. And then he has the experience of people recognizing in him that he did a good job of this,
Yeah.
like a commendable job of raising his kids in the faith.
Yeah.
So much so that he was asked to write this book and then to let this be literally his life's work. I mean, maybe not literally, still figuratively. I always mess with those words too much. But to have it be the culmination of all the work that he laid out in his life. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible. I dropped a fancy word, and I like to de-fancify words as much as possible.
He's a very unfancy man.
Unfancy. Let's not be fancy. Yeah, disciple or discipling.
Yeah.
Okay, so what in the world do we mean by the word disciple?
Yeah. So when you think about a disciple, you typically think of Jesus had 12 of them,
Yep.
right? So discipling has its root in us. We hear the word discipline. And so those kind of connections between learning, following, patterning, having intentionality. So the introduction is called "Who is Discipling Your Children?"
Yeah.
And it really kind of asks the question, like, what are they following? What are they learning from? What is causing them to grow? What's attracting them? What direction are they moving in? Really, like, who do they have their focus on? And I thought that was a really good question.
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, and as much as I like de-fancifying words, I also enjoy fun facts.
Mm-hmm.
So fun fact, like the word disciple is not Greek. It's not Hebrew. It's Latin, actually, from the word discipuli, which literally just means students, which like
Learner, yeah.
fun story. I was in teaching 8th grade religion. I don't remember what year this was, but I remember I was so excited. We'd really talked about discipleship, Pastor Cordray and I had, and so we talked about it. So I went in, I was like, had a kind of a fun day in class planned of talking what it means to be a disciple.
Yeah.
And so I wrote up the word student on the board and said, what does this word mean to you?
Oh no.
Yeah, exactly. Those 8th graders were like, boring.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm a huge learner. Like, I love learning things. I like finding new facts. I like discovering things. I like exploration. And so I was like, wow, from the get-go, just my icebreaker bombed the whole conversation because it was trying to bring up that idea of who are you truly learning from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm an image person, right? So as y'all were chatting and as reflecting on something, for me, discipling in that fashion of learning is being focused on Jesus. Right?
Good.
Jesus is the light, and we have darkness around us. So are we hiding in the darkness, or are we being drawn to Jesus? Now, we're not being drawn to Jesus. Jesus reaches out to us and pulls us into the light.
Yeah.
That's the gift of faith that we have. And so in that form, we then receive that light to shine around us, which is what the student does. And so when I think about discipling, I'm thinking about where we are drawing our energy and our source and our leadership from, which is, Jesus and that light that he provides. Because all around us, the darkness is trying to consume us.
Yeah.
Well, and to use another illustration, like that we saw on our junior high retreat last fall, food, right? Nourishment, right? So you're saying light into darkness, and I'm just saying, what are you putting into your body? Right? So in that way, it connects the metaphors of teaching with the metaphor of light.
Okay.
Like, are you eating healthy stuff?
Right.
What
or
are you
eating
consuming?
junk? What are you consuming? Good.
Yeah.
Good. I like that.
Because that kind of bridges the gap into like our consumer culture. And
Yes.
like, what do we buy? What
Yes.
do we, all of those things.
Oh, which is another reason why I'm so thankful I was not born today. Well, because again, like the older you get, the more you learn like how certain ad campaigns defined your life, right? And choices and habits that you made. So again, the ultimate question is, who are you listening to?
Yeah.
Who are you absorbing the information and actually listening to what it says? And so that's why it's such an important question. Who is discipling your children? I go back to my time at Pilgrim Lutheran Church and school in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I had 1 year there, vicarage, learning how to be a pastor. And I remember the billboard, or not billboard, that would be a great billboard, but it was a bulletin board, a little bit different, in the hallway of the school that was just convicting when I walked by it for the first time. And it said, if you're not teaching them, the world will.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those very convicting things that, like, if you really do just it's like, I mean, none of us would throw a baby out into the wilderness. I don't think, right? Am I wrong? like none of us would be like, no, go thin for yourself, go figure it out. And yet today I see that is the parenting model that the world teaches us.
Right.
Let them figure it out. No,
The
you go raise
schools will
my
take
kid.
care of it.
Yeah.
We have deferred a lot of
Mhm.
the discipling to either the school, the coach, I mean, like outside influence,
100%.
as opposed to us taking that ownership.
yeah.
And part of the excuse we give ourselves, and this might be very convicting, is we want to provide for them as the number one source.
Sure.
So provision, which means job and career,
Yeah, absolutely.
as opposed to saying, this is the most precious thing that God's gifted us with.
Mm,
And how are we
cultivating
that discipling, all of that, what they're consuming.
Yeah.
Right.
But I also want to call out the other one that I see as the guy that doesn't have kids. The other reason we're tempted to do that is because parenting is not easy.
It's hard
Right.
and it's scary, and you feel like you're not equipped for it.
Right.
And we sometimes we even look at the church and or our upbringing and see areas of failure or areas where it's like, I don't know if that's what I really want to teach my kid. And so there's
Right.
there's a lot of things stacked against parents trying to help kids navigate in this time as well.
And so to that extent, we are informed. Our parenting is informed through our own
Absolutely.
parenting, right?
Yeah.
And so we are responding or reacting based to how we were parented.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That then influences how we want to parent, and most of it comes in a reactive form, at least in my mind.
Sure. Yeah.
What I've seen is, oh, this is how my parents treat me, so I'm never going to treat my child that
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is how the only way I know, because
Yeah.
we'll revert to that.
Sure.
And so we may use some not so healthy
Mhm.
Techniques.
parenting
Yeah,
techniques,
yeah.
and all of these adds to the the challenge of parenting. And each child is so different.
Oh gosh.
It's not
yeah.
like, hey, I can parent my A1 or my
Yeah.
first child, and then suddenly realize my second child has a different set of
totally different
gifting,
personality and,
and
So
wiring.
I
and
got
yeah.
to this past Christmas, I got to meet my nephew, my new nephew. Like, I just hadn't seen my brother's family in a while. I live multiple states away, hundreds, thousands of miles, or not hundreds of
Oh my
thousands.
gosh, you live on the
Hundreds
moon.
planet are you
of
from?
miles away. Yeah. But it was so funny meeting my nephew because his older brother, so different.
Really? Oh,
Like,
that's cool.
completely different children. And it was like, what is happening? And my brother was like, I know, right? Because it's
Wow.
a discovery for
yeah,
us.
absolutely.
But the truth stands, like, parenting is hard for a whole lot of reasons. And I love that Chris points this out. Like, this is where Chris starts it. And I will say, like, I think one of the greatest compliments we've gotten about this podcast was before it even launched. I had shared it with friends of mine, like, just saying, hey, are we on the right track? Because this was one of the first podcasts that Trinity
Yeah.
started.
Right.
And so one of the greatest compliments I got was, first he said, I love that y'all just jump in.
Yeah.
Like, he says other podcasts waste a whole lot of time. And then
Yeah.
like you're like, cause he's like, I was starting to do other things and just listen along. And I was like, oh, they're going, let's go. But the second thing, and this is the greatest compliment, was he goes, I appreciate that y'all are real.
Mm.
He says, everything else that I'm listening to, and this is a pastor buddy of mine. He said, everything else that we listen to or that we read and consume as parents, and this is why there's such a fear,
Right.
Mhm.
tells me that parenting is easy.
Yeah.
Tells me that parenting is just a matter of doing this or doing this or doing this. And the truth of the matter is doing that's hard.
Very hard
Right?
and not always successful. Like you
Exactly.
can do all the right steps and it does not guarantee the outcome that you're looking for. Like it just
Absolutely. And I think that's the other thing we need to be, as anything, this is something that we want to encourage the parents who are listening to understand this is a challenge. Obviously, this is not something that can be done on your own, which is why we're hoping to equip you and provide you with some of those tools. But also know it's not a fail-proof
No.
system
Oh yeah,
at all.
right.
And your kids are wired and they have struggles themselves, and they may not end up the way you want them to do. But what we're hoping and encouraging is that you put some foundation and building blocks so that when they hit that point, they can see God as their source
Yeah.
to redirect or whatever. And it's not just you necessarily having to be the one rescuing them
Yeah.
in that sense, if that makes sense.
And I think a lot of the books that we've read, and this one included, it's almost like this is for the parent who's been on the sideline, not sure how to jump in, or maybe just feeling exhausted because what you've been trying hasn't worked.
Right.
And so, each of these is resources to help you step in intentionally, knowing who leads you, who parents you,
Right.
right? And then just helping you to keep your eyes fixed on that, and then, giving you some tools and resources, like we said,
Absolutely.
so that you can continue to kind of point your kids in that direction. And then the rest, which is probably the toughest part, is okay, now I'm entrusting this child to you, Lord.
Yes.
Just as you've been faithful to me, even though I'm a mess. Okay, I need to entrust that to you, and that's what my kids need to see. They need to
Right.
see a trusting relationship in Jesus, and that is going to be the transformative.
And I think
piece.
that's where we go back to scripture and see how Jesus
Mhm.
and his disciples, the interaction. He didn't always lecture them,
Mm-mm.
but he modeled
Mhm.
what was needed. He
Yeah.
modeled all these wonderful ways in which then the disciples learned, and they were able to do it after his death
Yeah.
for years, because they were surrounded
They
by the
witnessed it.
There
teacher.
was
Yeah,
Yeah.
such
absolutely.
intentional time on Jesus' part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're starting with this reality that parenting is tough,
Absolutely.
right? And at the same time, like, I appreciate just the spirit of a lot of conversations we've had at Trinity recently, and in order to uh, get through tough, it's going to take work,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So it's one of those. He calls it the bad news. I call it just the real news, right? It is what it is.
Yeah.
That parenting is tough, and I appreciate, like, Uma, what you were kind of pointing out. As the spirit of this podcast says this all the time, of you're gonna mess up.
Mhm.
Like, embrace the fact that you're gonna mess up. Your kid's gonna mess up. They're gonna make
Absolutely.
mistakes. But those are opportunities. Those are opportunities for
Yes.
growth, for learning, for discernment. Because not one of you is raising a robot that I know of.
Nope.
And even if you were,
Well,
like,
and like repetition and practice of how to deal with messes is part of life.
Yes.
So it really truly is an opportunity. We mess this one up, or we miss something, and we get the opportunity to work through that mistake or that challenge or that disappointment. And in doing that, we're modeling for our kids a skill that if they didn't have the challenge, they wouldn't be able to learn it now. And then when they do get the challenge, they're either equipped or they're not.
And there are different seasons to parenting, and we've covered that in
Mhm.
previous episodes. And I liken to think of ourselves as in a kayak, right? And sometimes you're going to hit a rapid, sometimes you're going to have some smooth waters.
Mm.
And during those rapids is where we're talking about, yes, parenting is tough,
Mhm.
and it can seem overwhelming and out of control. But then there will be calm waters.
Yeah.
There's a moment where
There's a bend in the road coming.
yeah, and you're going to
So-
see this child, and he talks about it. I'm not sure if it's in the first chapter. He's like, wow, this child is amazing, and then the next moment, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's the reality of parenting. You're going to have those highs and lows,
Mhm.
but are you steady through those waters? Are you
Yeah.
steady navigating through that?
what I'm hearing is the homework of the listener is to
Yes.
go on a whitewater rafting trip with a guide. Don't
Yes.
go by yourself, right? Maybe
Hey,
not in a kayak. That's terrifying, Uma. But maybe parenting is too. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I get exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying, because when you're going through the rapids, you have to have different attention.
Yes.
You have to be very focused on what steps to take
Yep.
and
Yeah.
all this other stuff, versus when you're smooth sailing, looking around, taking in the beauty of everything. Yeah. So I appreciate that metaphor for sure.
Mhm.
When we think about why parenting is hard, though, I didn't know where he was going by introducing Alexander the Great. I did
Right.
appreciate that he called him Mr. the Great at
Yes.
one point. But basically, he brings Alexander the Great into the conversation to talk about,
Mhm.
like, Alexander the Great was brilliant in that when he was conquering the world, which, again, I don't recommend for anybody but Jesus, the way that he did it, right, to bring together so many different cultures, was that he didn't tell them they had to stop their current culture. He simply added in his culture. So he was
Mhm.
like, by all means,
Keep worshiping your gods.
Keep practicing the Judaism. Oh, by the way, we're also going to learn about these other gods, right? So, and he talked about, Chris talked about 4 facets of society that Alexander the Great specifically made a plan to influence culture so that it would be brought under his empire. And that was entertainment, information, sports, and education. I thought this was just so fascinating.
It really is. Like Hellenism, the entire piece of that, and how, you can control
Hellenism's
people.
A fancy word. What does it mean?
That's the tactic that Alexander the Great.
We got to break it down. What does it mean?
Getting there. So you're
Greek culture. Yeah, that's a fancy word
culture.
for Greek culture. I'm sorry,
Right.
I just make sure. I always like catching fancy words.
Yes.
Dallas is used to it, Melanie. She gets on me all the time, but she's with me. Yeah.
I thought I was explaining it.
Oh,
That's
no,
okay.
yeah.
I was
Hellenism, yeah.
Hellenism, yeah. So instead of just conquering people and saying you will submit to these things, you just kind of place this umbrella over them and provide these other opportunities to distract, and you appease people and distract people in order to keep them occupied, pacified, so that you can continue to rule them without a whole lot of effort.
Yeah.
You don't have to have, massive armies, and you're not going to have constant battles because you're going to give them enough of the fun things like the gladiators and the road system, that they're going to be okay paying the taxes and they won't want to start a rebellion. And so, this adding in this Greek culture, I love that he draws the parallels that that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
And by kind of, I mean, that's hugely where we are.
But it's also where we've always been. Like, I appreciate it in the entertainment section, how it pointed out, I just go back to not one of my favorite classes in college, but one that I appreciated, which is 19th century American literature. And one of the approach of the teacher, she made us look at the most popular books in certain decades of the 19th century and then do the same thing for the 21st century that we were living in. And it was mind-blowing because basically what she was saying to us was, just look at what people are reading, entertainment for 200 years ago, but even now, right? And the same thing is true. You could look at the highest grossing films. You could look at plays over the years to really see what was culture talking about. And so you think of Alexander the Great, if you don't really have entertainment in these places that you're going to, you get to create the stories and the entertainment. And so that applies to what you were saying, Melanie, so what's your family consuming today when it comes to entertainment? What are they learning today from entertainment? I go back to like as I was reading it, I was kind of like, oh, I remember Growing Pains. I remember Doug, Hey Arnold. Like I remember some of these things. And I remember my parents not letting me watch Ren and Stimpy. They weren't necessarily comfortable with me watching Rocko's Modern Life. And now I look back and I go, oh, I see why. Because they were talking about things that I had no idea what they were, but and that could influence the words that I use, the things that I say, the phrases. And all of a sudden it just becomes commonplace. Even though we're doing our own culture, we're going to church, we're hearing the good news and all this other stuff, by bringing in the entertainment piece, all of a sudden, I'm absorbing stuff, I'm being taught stuff that I don't even realize that I'm taking in at that point.
And then the next couple of pieces that Alexander the Great influenced heavily was information. He had the ability to cultivate what information was shared, how it was shared, and there was information barriers that meant it took time for information to be shared across the empire. And so that piece, being able to control information, and that's something we know about, that's something we're 1984 and some of our, dystopian,
but for real.
We understand that whoever controls the information has a whole lot of scary power and control over the masses.
But also and again, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's fun. History was never a field I deeply appreciated. But again, when I got to take some courses in college on it, it was fascinating to deep dive on certain pieces of history that I never knew about, right? Because I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but whoever's in control of the information, well, do you know who's in control of the situation is the people that win the wars.
That's right, yeah.
So
you get
never,
the victor's side of it.
Another class in college, man, Birmingham Southern, I'm giving you a lot of shout outs right now. But I took a class on how the history of World War II. That was a Pastor Ralph. Asia and the Pacific, right?
Whoa, yeah.
Because we all think of World War II and we think of Europe and the European front.
Yeah.
And it was really cool the way Professor Levy set up the class, because we got to look at how the colonized countries over in Asia, which we don't think of colonized countries in Asia. We think of colonized country in
Africa
India and
South
Africa.
America. Yeah.
We don't think of Asia, and then it was look at how China remembers it.
Yeah.
Look at how the Korea remembers it. Look
Cambodia.
at how Japan
remembers it.
remembers it.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind.
Yeah.
The same thing is true of like looking at the history of civil rights in America. Like I remember moving to Texas around that time, Obama was still president, and there was this conversation about Juneteenth. I'd never heard of
it,
Juneteenth. Now Texans knew about Juneteenth because it started here in Texas, but I remember people looking at me going, "How do you not know this?" And I was like, my history books didn't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Which
So
is, that's
information.
Information is power.
Oh,
And
It's so crazy to think about.
And it applies in both ways, right? Whether it's Alexander the Great or whether it's today's world, who controls the narrative whoever controls the information controls the narrative, and it's usually the people in power.
Yeah.
Right? And they can manipulate reality and truth. And I think that's part of this story, is part of what Alexander was really good at and continues today in different fashions throughout the world, is that this the vehicle in which information is used has in itself created doubt, right?
Yep.
So now you almost like, I can't trust anyone.
So circling back to the
And it goes back
conversation
to scripture.
Chris is having,
Yeah.
that's a terrifying world to be raising a parent or
Right.
kid.
Right.
I guess they're raising parents too. Because information is at their fingertips, quite literally, with the phones. I used to write that way, right?
Yeah.
In the sense of like you can look up, but the question is, what's true, what's not true?
Yeah. And what algorithms are in play to
Mm-hmm.
funnel specific information to you, so that when you Google one thing, you're going to get a different answer than when I Google it because of our search histories and whatever else. And
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely
This past
overwhelming.
Christmas, we had a family member that I hadn't seen in forever, that there was an awkward moment with a huge gathering of family where they said they're a flat earth person. Like they're just convinced by it. And speaking of like listening and algorithms, like just last night I was texting my family. I was like, it was listening to us because it was a post and somebody said, flat earth theorists have said that their numbers are growing around the globe. I don't know if they realize what they just said.
Around. That's perfect.
I've seen
But
that
like
for
think about
years.
information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those, like, we were all kind of like, okay. Like we did it because it was very much like, I believe this. I don't want to talk about it. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. All right. What information are you using? What information are they using?
Yeah.
And again, that's a scary world for your kiddos, right? And so
Right.
the question is, where are they getting information? How are they learning to process information? That's one of the things I love about my education was that I had teachers that really taught us what it meant to discern, to really look at information, to evaluate whether or not it's true, what's being said.
Well, and like that uncovers a whole nother level of truth,
Yes.
right? Information and beliefs versus truth, reality. And, that entire conversation is something that, 150 years ago, you probably wouldn't have had to fight to say that there is a singular truth and a singular reality.
Yeah.
And now, that has to be weighed into the equation as well when you're having a conversation about anything.
And I'll bring in Pastor Gene's refrain that he got from somewhere, that truth is reality as perceived by God. Because like my college years was being brought up in the meta truth, all this other stuff. Like, is there such a thing as truth? And it's funny,
Or is
like
there just 1,000 perceptions?
people think that's like a new conversation,
Right.
but I always point out, like, one of the
Pilate.
questions that Pilate asked Jesus the night that he dies, the day that he dies,
Yeah.
what is truth, right?
Yeah.
So they're even wrestling with it back then. So we're still doing that. And I think this connects to number 4.
Yeah.
I'll skip it for just a second, but like number 3 for a second, but education, right? So this is why it's really important. What I was kind of saying is, are we even teaching our kids to discern, to listen, to recognize there are multiple perspectives out there, but then to really have the conversation of what is truth, what is not. Like I vividly remember a Malcolm in the Middle episode that I may have quoted on a previous season of this podcast, Do you remember the show Malcolm in the Middle?
Yeah.
Vaguely. The Breaking Bad guy was the dad. And I don't remember the actress.
Cranston or something.
Bryan Cranston, yeah.
Okay.
He was the dad, and the mom was Miss Rule Follower,
Yes.
Miss in Command, never broke a rule ever.
Okay.
Well, she gets a ticket in the episode. And she was like, I did not break the rules. I did not, blah, 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 blah. There's this sign, blah, blah, blah. And by the end of the episode, she concedes, which is
Shocking.
never happening on the episode or before, any episode before, that no, I did the wrong thing. I saw the video, blah, 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 blah. She saw the video. It was truth. And then like later a detective, like after that moment, like in the episode's about to end, a detective comes or calls the dad out and shows a bigger view to see that she actually wasn't in the wrong, like all this other stuff.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
But right, it's all about like,
Yeah. How you frame
do you
it.
really
How much do you-
determine?
yeah.
How much do you know? Do you have all the perspectives? Do you have all the information? And again, history is just layered, which just goes back to what Chris is saying. Y'all teaching your kids, raising your kids, discipling your kids today is tough. Now, that said, I'll give you a brief good news. Like, we're here for you. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're talking about this.
This is not an insurmountable enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have entertainment, we have information, we have education. What was number 4 that Alexander the Great utilized?
Sports ball.
Sports ball. Yeah. And again, that goes with entertainment.
I think
right?
so too. Yeah.
But
It's an interesting one because like entertainment is passive. Sports is more interactive.
Ooh, I like that.
You know what I mean? So like
Interesting.
I can be distracted by entertainment, but I can be drawn into
Invested.
and focused and invested in sports, at least from an athlete perspective, which I don't have.
No, that's absolutely true. But even from because there's the participatory side of sports,
Right.
and you can get better, and this
And so,
connected
like-
with the information, right? Because he
Yeah.
said like you could get out there. Who is the fastest man in the world? Ooh, now I want to do that. Now
Yeah.
I'm invested. Now I'm pursuing fame, stuff like that.
And so it's good to distinguish that here it's talking about, who's discipling your children. And the question is like the sports that they're playing, not the football game that they're watching. Like, so I think that's where the two different categories come from.
Fair enough. Yep.
Because, he gives the example of all the children in Jewish communities would be taught by a rabbi, and that's how they would kind of spend their days and things. But now they have these, images of, how fast can you run? And, could you be an excellent gladiator? Or what other, things could you do? And so then that occupies their time, their focus, their energy.
Yeah.
In, like you said, participatory way.
Yep. And then I appreciate where Chris transitions, right? So he lays out for us, like, okay, parenting is hard. But then the other challenge of parenting is you have such a short time frame. In the grand scheme, you have such a short time frame by which you get to raise your kids and parent them, right? And this really beautiful chart, right? I guess for those watching, you can kind of see it from a little bit of a distance, but it kind of just shows this progression down of when they're babies, you have a whole lot of time, a whole line left. But then as they get older, you just have less and less and less and less time to actually be able to have with your kid to disciple them. And as we were kind of briefly talking before, both of you, like we're talking about how you think about this with your own kids. Like this was very convicting when I looked at it.
Absolutely. I think about my 2-year-old versus my 8-year-old and the difference in the number of days I have left with my 8-year-old is shocking.
That's like a 2,000, 3,000 difference right there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
8 years.
Wow.
So it's
6 years.
6 years difference. Yeah. And like my kids, my older 2 kids are adopted. So like I didn't even get the first few years with them. And so that's something that I think we talked about it in Habits of the Household. They said kind of map out your milestones and things. And that, it's always been on my mind that, there are pieces that I don't get to be a part of because of their story, and that's okay. But it pushes me to be much more intentional with every moment that I do have.
Right.
And I think that's the impetus here for this chart is not, oh, hey, look how much time you've wasted. It goes by a whole lot faster than you think. And Uma, you and I were talking about how, as the kids get older, like if we broke it down by hours, the hours you have with your newborn are
a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
But once you jump into like high school and you add in the sports and the entertainment and the screen time and all the things, the hours that you get to spend with your 16-year-old are much fewer than the days that are listed.
Yeah.
Because they're in school, they're doing this, they're doing that. You're working, you're doing. So it goes even faster than this chart actually shows you.
Yeah, it's more exponential because like
Right.
I even think you were talking about just the transition, high school driving, all that stuff. I'm like, friends, just when your kid starts to go to school, whether that's early childhood or kindergarten, like all of a sudden, because you said baby,
Right.
I was like, baby, they don't leave you, you know, for the most part.
Right.
But man, does that change when they're in
And
someone
in
else's care?
hindsight, for me, I think one of the gifts that I didn't realize that I received was my boys didn't get their license till they were 18 and after high
Oh,
school,
wow.
which meant I was able to drive them to all their places. And as a dad, I didn't take advantage with Avi that I've been more intentional with the other two.
Sure.
Was the time in commuting to all these spaces.
It's a sacred space that
It
you don't think
is
about.
because they're trapped with me in the car. Yeah, let's
They
go.
can't leave.
And yes, of course they're going to put in their plug, the earphones and whatnot. But if you create this culture of intentionality and discipling,
Openness
those
and
conversations start to unfold, and pretty soon you're sitting in your driveway having an hour-long conversation, and you just walk after, and you're like, "This was a God
good,
gift." Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So Chris gives us this sobering reflection time, like to recognize that in the grand scheme, the hours are so much shorter. Invites us to not take time for granted because it flies by. And this quote really resonated with me. He says the challenge is that in the moment we rarely feel the pressure of losing time. It's only when we reflect back that we realize how short the years are.
Which is another hindsight's 2020. You know, like
And I think even those with like young kids, you can relate with what they're saying for just other items in life, right? I think of time with grandparents. I think of other things like that. Just time with family, like being a single guy that's been away from just visiting family multiple times a year, 8 years ago. Like that's a drastic difference. So it's like, okay, wow, this is really something to take in when it comes to raising your kids, right?
Yeah.
comes back to that word intentionality.
Absolutely.
Like if we can make one shift, it's that we see things with intention. You know, we see these as opportunities to be intentional, and that we take steps in those moments.
Yeah.
And just thinking of him as he's penning this, and knowing
The
not
whole,
knowing,
I see what you're
Yeah,
saying. Yeah,
yeah.
The years being short and him
He
not
didn't realize
realizing
how much shorter-
We're
Short.
not guaranteed
yes,
Yeah.
that we
that's-
get to walk with them every step
Right.
of the way until they're
Right.
18 and 30.
Right.
And, you know,
That-
we're not guaranteed.
Yeah, and again, this is going back to some of the students I had who've lost a parent in their high school years, and then
Yeah.
them seeing mom or dad, and I lost out on because
Yeah.
they're never going to see me
Mm.
graduate. They're never going to see me. I'm thinking of one young person in particular who I've built a relationship. I'm like, wow. Imagine his perspective.
Yeah.
We're seeing this from a parent's perspective, but suddenly realizing what his two kids must have thought of with dad,
Yeah.
writing this book. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, and like, because I'm like sitting there, someone's already shut us off because this is.
They're like, I can't think about it.
Right,
Yeah,
right. It
it's-
seems very depressing. And I would say there's like one more set of just hard truth
Yeah.
to wrestle with the bad news before we get into the good news. And I appreciate the list that he has here on page 22. He says, as Christian families, let's get this straight, right? Just call out what's real. We're living in, he called it vulture culture, which
Yeah.
is very strong, designed to integrate our children. But what he's saying is the same thing that Alexander the Great was trying to do.
Right.
Like ultimately, society is trying to keep you in line, trying to get you to pursue money, be distracted, all this other stuff. The same thing that Satan's been alive and well
Yeah.
doing for all of creation and all of time. We're up against a time constraint to lead our children to Christ. Number 3, though, is the one that got me. This is the reason why I
Yeah.
wanted to point to the list
I
here.
love that one.
Yeah.
The culture's focus for our children is more about hard work than pursuing their faith. So in the pages right before this, it talks about what is the message that our culture, our world is trying to instill into parents. You think about, and again, it's not a negative thing. Hard work is a good thing.
Yeah.
But you think about school systems, right? What are they put in place to do? Any school system wants to get kids ready for the workforce. Like that's the goal, because you want a society that works and that does hard work. And then what was the oh yeah, it was this poll, right?
Mm.
If we analyze the top child rearing values across American adults, we find being responsible is number one.
Right.
So the best thing an adult can do is be responsible.
And
Number
then
two is hard
work's number
work.
2. Yeah.
Number three, at 30% of those polled, was faith.
Yeah.
A distant third. So the culture says, do hard work and be responsible.
And from a Lutheran perspective, we're just like cringing because we know how amazing God's grace is and how tempting the idea of my responsibility and my hard work earning me value, in God's
absolutely.
eyes is
Yeah.
so it's so poisonous.
Absolutely.
And then to see the culture doing it too, that you have no value or you have nothing to give unless you create it yourself. Like that's the devil.
and I think I'll be a little charitable to like all Christians, right? Because it's a Lutheran perspective, especially when it comes to salvation.
Right.
But man alive, I've met a lot of workaholics in the Lutheran church.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Right? Because I've met a lot of workaholics in America, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just the culture of America is to go, to do, to value hard work more than anything else.
To achieve, to
And
provide.
then at the end of the day, right, that's where I go on the more charitable, like the whole Christian approach is your value is not in what you do, what you
Right.
accomplish, what any church would agree with that,
Yeah.
right? It's not in that. It's in what Jesus has done for you and who he
Right.
calls you.
And I think that's something I struggled personally being an immigrant and coming into this culture that is so driven by hard work and defining hard work. I remember my first year out of college into my internship and listening to a bunch of hardened boomer at a Bible study guys who are plumbers and farmers and whatnot. And they were talking about how lazy this generation is. And this was like 25 years ago.
Sure, yeah.
And he said, we worked till the work was done and all that. And yet every one of them were divorced and everyone had unhealthy relationship with their kids. And I'm like, did all that hard work,
Yeah.
what has that led you to, you
Well,
know?
and as you're talking though, I'm reminded too, this isn't necessarily an American thing. Cause I
Right.
remember
Oh,
you
sure,
talking
yeah.
about like your dad worked really, really hard as a
Dentist. Yeah.
dentist. I was gonna say doctor. I was like, I know
Yeah.
it's not, but it's the same concept of
Yeah.
like around the world, there is a somewhat of a concept of keep moving and go.
Right.
Except for in the global South, there's much more of an appreciation of
Yes.
Enjoying, rest.
enjoying,
Yeah, I mean,
tasting,
With
absorbing.
all the hard
Yeah.
work my dad did, it was sprinkled with intentional time with my mom and us.
Yeah.
There was
Came
moments
home every day for lunch,
every
you
day.
said.
Yeah, like he came home and had tea and breakfast with her. He came and had lunch with her in between his work hour, 8-hour day.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that's something that's unheard here. We lock ourselves into these compartments, work life and then home life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't let sometimes them bleed. And I'm like, I'm thinking of my kids even as I'm working, you know?
Yeah.
As opposed to just separating and compartmentalizing everything.
Absolutely. So enough of the bad news, friends.
Yes,
Right.
let's
The bad
get to
news
the good news.
is and the real news is parenting is tough. It's a hard world to be raising kids. So what is the good news that we have?
Hope in Jesus. It's a
Amen.
person. We have a person
Mhm.
who models it for us, who's accomplished it for us, who empowers us through the power of the Holy Spirit. And the good news, I loved this. I had never thought about it before. The first children that were ever born
Yes.
were born
Outside
after
Eden.
the fall. So good news is there are no perfect parents except God.
Except the Father. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you are not a failure just by virtue of the fact that none of us is doing this perfectly, and that's why we need a savior. And thank goodness we have Jesus.
Yeah.
Amen.
I appreciate how the good news is we have a person, and then later on he says we also have a plan.
Yes.
Like he gives us a plan. He gives us something to listen to. And I'm getting caught in other conversations we're having at the moment because I'm like, the question is whether or not you're giving him your attention,
Yes.
right? Whether or not your eyes are on him, whether or not you're listening to him,
Mhm.
whether or not you're carving out the time to actually learn from him and things like that.
Yeah.
So we have a person and we have a plan, which
Yes.
I appreciate how Chris kind of says that plan is easy, right? Ultimately,
It's simple.
it's simple. He says having a plan is easy. And it pretty much, this is my paraphrase, doing it's hard.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Actually investing is the hard part. And I
Yep.
do appreciate, I'm all about visuals, y'all.
Mhm.
And I appreciate I usually would like super analyze this and be like, oh, what's going on? But I was like, I did a good step back. I was
They're
like,
gonna
I
get
will-
to
I
it.
will get to it
That's
and I
right.
will unpack this visual and things like that. Because it's going to give us a framework
Yep.
of looking at what Jesus does for us, what plan he sets out for us. And I do appreciate it's kind of the spirit of the podcast. I think books
Mhm.
that we choose all have this kind of similar vein or perspective or philosophy, that it's really just embracing every moment that God gives you, like
Mhm.
whatever that looks like, however that looks like,
Mhm.
and really leaning into just what to do in the moments that you already have. So it's not
Yeah.
asking you to drastically change
Right.
how you do your entire life. It's saying, are you being loving
It's
Yeah.
in your
changing
interactions?
your lens.
And
for-
and
yeah.
to put it also, yes, we have a person in Jesus. Yes, we have a plan that Chris lays out, but there's a purpose behind it, and that's
Yes.
important too. And that's to make disciples,
Good.
which is the undertone of everything that we're hoping to
Mhm.
share
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
unpack over the next few weeks. It is that Jesus sums it all up in 2 words: make disciples.
Yeah.
And
And I
that's kinda where-
appreciate how he, like, but even before he goes back to make disciples, he talks about just the phrase mature kids.
Yes,
Like the goal is to make mature kids and mature in the faith,
right.
right?
Mhm.
Man, that would be a good mature in the faith podcast. Right? Raise them in the faith, raise them up.
Raise them in the.
That would be a good one. Yeah. So yeah, like to mature them, and this is why, like, people have heard this phrase from me before, but I think it's so true. When your kid's going from 6th to 7th grade, you're no longer raising a boy or a girl. You're raising a man or a woman.
Yes.
Right? You have to have that mindset. And I know I just told you what you have to do, but I truly believe that.
But again, it's about changing your lens, changing the way you look
Perspectives.
Yes.
at what's happening around you so that you behave differently,
Mhm.
right? The way
Yeah.
you think about it needs to change so that your behavior follows.
Yeah, because what I just said was not something you have to change to do something different or to
Right.
rearrange something different. It's just simply changing the way you think
Right.
about what you're doing as a parent.
And the rest flows from that. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, somebody's going, easy to say for the guy without kids. But it probably is, right? Because it was so funny talking to a parent this last basketball season, and just when someone, like a kid, gets in a tough with your
Mhm.
your kid on
Yeah.
the basketball court, like you like
Yeah.
you're like, I don't know, you can't do that. That's my baby. And it's like, that's your grown baby. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
they can handle it. Keep
Yeah.
walking alongside of them, like that kind of a thing. So
Talking about that, I just saw a video of a mom of a college senior. So this is an older kid, but he is 3-time state wrestling champ
wow.
in the state of Iowa, and he was going for his full title, and he lost in the final match.
No.
And this mom lost it. You could see she
Mm.
took her glasses, broken into pieces, and what for me goes back to a little bit of the bad news, but I know we've covered that. But this whole idea is she saw her son's identity
Oof.
in that
Interesting.
success, and at that moment she couldn't handle it. And so, as parents, how are we responding to when our kids deal with failures and struggles, and how are we discipling them to handle
Yeah.
those
Is-
pitfalls and stuff?
As you were
Ooh.
telling that story, like, I was reminded, and again, it wasn't the exact same thing, but my junior year, I was involved with something called Beta Club. It's kind of like National Honor Society over here in Texas, even though Texas does have Beta Club too, in some places, or it did forever ago when I was in high school. And I ran for state Beta Club president, right?
Mhm.
And I put a whole lot of work into it, a whole lot of thought into it. There was only 4 of us candidates at the state convention or whatever that we were running for. And my mom was there. Like, she knew, like, that's what I was going for. And when they announced that I got second, right, I didn't win. And it was a guy that joked to get to win, because that was what I was going to win,
Yeah.
making people laugh and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't serious. I was too serious. Imagine that. And so then upon hearing it, like, I walked out of the ballroom and went to a nearby one, and my mom's heart was just breaking. Like, she was crying because she saw me breaking, because you work so hard for something and then
Yes.
you don't get
Yeah.
it. But it wasn't because my identity was in me winning that. It was more so, it's so hard to watch your kid,
Hurt.
Struggle.
Yeah.
lose, hurt,
Yeah.
fail, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's different ways, like, where you're both parents are invested
Yes.
in their kids,
Right.
but their investment might be in a different aspect of
Right.
that relationship,
And
or
how do you
that
model
child.
that too for your
Yeah.
child? Because I think that's important. And it starts early on when you do have those opportunities, when they do mess up at a younger age or when they put a lot of work and they still don't get it. I
Yeah.
remember teaching my kids, to say, my oldest had a problem saying yellow. Hello. He would always say hello, right? And then, his frustration, seeing him be frustrated
Sure, yeah.
and how you're responding to that
Yeah,
as a
yeah, yeah.
parent and saying, honey, it's fine,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
keep working and let's
yeah.
go back to the basics. And then when he finally did, a year later, and then to celebrate with him
Yeah, yeah.
and say and I think that's part of it is just understanding that this is a process. It's not going to be overnight fixed.
Yeah.
Nothing we're going to
Right.
share is going
Right.
to instantly fix your child, but you're setting again building blocks for them to be.
And it adds up over time.
Yes.
Is it Stephen Covey who talks about your relationship bank account, and you just want to make more deposits than
Yes.
withdrawals,
Sure,
and then the same
absolutely.
thing with discipling. You want to make as many deposits as
Yes.
you can with the time that you have, and so it is the intentional time. All of those things. I really like the way the chapter or the introduction ends.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I like, okay, what's the practical? What can I do to help shift my mindset, to help me, really evaluate what's going on? And so they give you the 4 categories: entertainment, education, sports, and information.
Good questions there too.
Great
Yeah.
questions. Yeah. How does your child's exposure to entertainment like YouTube, Twitch, social media influence their perspective on life?
Mhm.
And how, if, can you see a way that it impacts their faith? Each category I think had some fantastic questions.
And I think it's
like
good
that.
to share them. Yeah. I mean, education, what are your children being taught? What are teachers leading them to believe about society, religion, ethics, other key subjects? Have you had discussions with them about these areas and what you believe? Because again, information is not bad.
Right.
Even you think of what's the spaghetti god monster or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, somebody believes that. What do you believe? Right? It's able to
And
hear
having
information
different
and then-
perspective is not necessarily inherently bad. It just allows you to be able to know your truth and your understanding more.
I'm all about the sharpening of our
Exactly.
own perspectives as
Exactly,
Christians,
yeah.
right?
Be
So we
curious,
can
not
hear things.
judgmental.
Yes,
Good, yeah.
exactly. That's what I was looking for.
And
Yeah.
again, you got to be discerning on
Yes.
age for your kids and what they're able to handle, what they're not able to handle.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's one of the things I appreciate about Christianity is we're not a secret society. We don't have insider information. We want the world to know what we believe.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things of we're not trying to seclude our kids entirely. Like again, there's a level of appropriateness depending on the age of a child. But ultimately what we believe we're wanting to share with the entire world. So
Yeah.
there's nothing to fear either because truth is going to stand at the end of the day too.
Right.
Amen.
Sports, how do extracurricular activities take a priority in your home?
Oh, that's going to hit some people hard.
How are each of your children learning to prioritize their pursuit of Jesus over their
Yeah.
pursuit of athletic success?
Have you ever thought about your children's pursuit of Jesus? That's a question.
Yeah.
Have you ever
Yeah.
really thought?
Information, where are your children learning about the events of the day? Whose version of those events are they seeing as most trusted? Have you spoken with your children about how to discern truth when everyone has their version of what is wrong and right? Yeah, right
So
and wrong.
good.
I
And
thought
then,
that was great. Yeah.
yeah, there's some more homework pieces that really reminded me of some of previous books that we've had, like
Yeah.
chart out key milestones in your children's lives. Like when are they gonna, turn 13? When are they gonna get their driver's license? When are you anticipating that they'll get a first job?
I have a
Things like
feeling
that.
he's going to revisit those because that
Yes.
was something he mentioned a few times there at
Right.
the end of the
Yeah.
chapter. So I'm excited to hear. Like again, he was seriously like the whole, like put a timer in your like it's
Yeah.
like or I can imagine like imagine you did this. Imagine every time on Majesty's birthday, it was not Majesty's birthday. It said 5 years left till sweet 16,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like till
This
she
is
goes
how
to
many
college.
days you have left
Yeah.
until she's 18.
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
something like that.
So just those kind of milestone reminders, like
Mhm.
woof, that would be a different
Absolutely.
grounding for sure.
And I think going back to Melanie's point, you're going to notice that some of these themes have been covered in previous podcasts because they are to
Useful.
fundamental.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it may be a time for you to go back and check out some of those podcasts
Previous
as well,
podcasts. Yeah.
because it will give you a little bit more on that particular topic. But I love how as we continue to build on each of these series, raise them up, you're going to see some familiar themes and you're going to find
Yeah.
some of these
Yeah.
things. And that's when you can use that discernment and say, man, there is some validity and
Yeah.
there's some truth behind it. And as humans, it takes us sometimes 7 times to hear the same
Yeah.
thing.
And
Yeah.
hey,
So-
7th season.
Yes, there you go. And so just to say, we're here to encourage you guys. This is not
Yeah.
something that, especially as a parent myself, speaking at, whose kids are launching off, and now I'm waiting for the next phase as potential grandparents, hopefully down the road. But again, just what we've been through, Tony and I, in raising our boys and being able to say, there were some hard days, some absolutely hard days, but it's also great to see what they are now and to see how the discipling has taken impact in their lives and to see them pursue Jesus as you talk about in their own way. And for us to sit back and say, okay, now Jesus, we've done our part, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now this journey is with them, because at some point it's going to transition from you being the primary drive of that faith to then them
Owning
being
it,
on their
yeah.
own. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's critical too.
And I'm all for going back and listening to past seasons. But if you're a first-time listener too, just enjoy the ride. Just
Yes.
join
Right.
us next time as we get to take a peek at. Y'all read it already.
Yes.
It's a crock pot, not a
It's-
microwave.
Ooh,
Yes,
I
I
love
love it.
that. Slowing down,
that's
friends,
right.
not
Yes.
speeding up.
Low and slow.
So learning what it means to disciple them like Jesus. We'll keep talking about what that means. As we do, if you enjoyed this, by all means, thank you for joining the conversation. Be sure to like us on whatever platforms, subscribe on whatever platform it is that you're listening to us on. Certainly, ratings are always fun too. But if you have questions, we're always open to those. Specifically, we have the social media platform of the Facebook.
Book of Faces.
The Book of Faces, that you can ask any questions there for sure. But yeah, you know where to find us. We would love to answer any questions. But at the end of the day, we're just thankful for you joining this conversation. And we will see you next time.